Hello, this is the Torg Eternity Delphi Council Debriefings, where the storm has a name. We are your hosts, Lehman, Mark, and Jay, and today we have a mailbag episode. So we have 3 emails sent in to us after a few weeks of not getting emails. So we do encourage you to write us at torgdcd@gmail.com, and we will read your email, we'll answer your questions like we do in this episode, and if you have comments, we'll comment on your comments, etc. So we'll do that for this email. We have 3 from Daniel, from Sitting Duck, and from Craig. So let's just dive into the mailbag. So let's get into the first question, which is a question about ORDs disconnecting and contradictions by ORDs. So it says, hello, Lehman, Mark, and Jay, or special guest host of the day. The rhyme was not intended. Thank you for answering my last email during the debriefing number 53. My first email, I asked about the game that Mark referenced a couple of times. It was exactly the Wednesday night stream that I met. Thank you. I was able to find the channel in YouTube and Twitch. So if you've been watching, we do thank you for watching that on Roll, Hit, Die. And you can also watch those on both YouTube and or Twitch when we stream those most Wednesdays. As I told you in my last email, I'm a game master for just 3 years now, and I often do mistakes about rules in Torg Eternity, but nevertheless, me and my group enjoy it a lot. I am leading them through a mega adventure that I made up myself, inspired by the book Otherland by Tad Williams. From 6 months of playing the adventure planned, we are currently playing since 2 years. Gosh. Currently, my group is in Aurorsh, and I was asking myself if they could meet ORDs from another cosm. My problem is I believe I do not understand what the core rulebook says about transformation of ORDs. I am referring to the German rulebook, and I translate it as good as I can with correct English terms. Is it possible for ORDs to go to other cosms? I would say yes, because the core rulebook says about dominant zones that ORDs can cause contradictions as long as they don't disconnect. Also, there is written if an ORD is disconnected, she cannot reconnect as long as she is not in her home cosm. In addition, there is written about pure zones. ORDs can't cause contradiction in pure zones. Does that mean that it would be possible for a core Earth person to go to a pure zone of Aurorsh, ride through with a horse or carriage, and could pass without disconnecting, as long as a person has nothing contradictorous with her, or does contradiction things? I would say contrary would be the English word that I would use, things. And the core Earth ORD could also go into a dominant zone of Aurorsh and take a mobile phone with her and possibly disconnect, but could reconnect to core Earth once she goes back to core Earth. Phew, hopefully my wall of text is not too confusing and my English is good enough that you can understand my explanation. Thanks for keeping up the work on the debriefings. I enjoy listening to them, and they help me much to see things in Torg in different ways and become a better game master. Greetings from Germany again, Daniel. So Daniel, thank you very much for writing us again. We are always happy to hear from everybody, especially, or is just as important to hear from those outside of the United States and North America. So that is cool to hear that we are reaching you over in Germany. So I will state a few things, and then I will ask Mark and Jay for their thoughts and opinions. But in the initial wave of a new reality invading a different cosm and being bound by stele, there's kind of an axiom wash that goes forth through the zone that is bounded by the stele. And during that initial axiom wash, you will have lots of immediate transformations that will happen, depending on if it's pure, mixed, or dominant zones. Then after that initial axiom wash, depending on if you're in pure, dominant, or mixed zones, Ords will sooner or later disconnect. And it doesn't necessarily have to deal with a physical thing, it could be a mental thing too, such as a higher thought or social concept than the reality that you're in. If that happens, you could get disconnected. If you then made it back to your original reality, say core Earth in this case, you could reconnect to core Earth. But the longer you spend in that new reality, in this case it would be Aurosh, if you're from core Earth and you go to Aurosh, you're not immediately transformed, but you eventually will disconnect through something, even if it's not a cell phone. It could be, but it could be a thought above the Aurosh social axiom. And then you could reconnect. You could transform. It wouldn't be an immediate reconnect, but you would say in Storm Knights would fail a reconnect roll, mishap on it. Ords really don't do that. At some point, they're going to reconnect to something. They could transform to Aurosh and then reconnect to Aurosh, and then for all intents and purposes, they are Auroshan. If they get through that reality fast enough without the transformation, they could go back to core Earth or whatever their home reality is, and by spending time there, kind of reconnect and reestablish themselves with it. The problem is when they go and they transform to a new reality, and then they go back and disconnect and transform again, because then they've lost all their possibility energy. It has not been filled. They haven't been filled with enough possibility energy to withstand a second transformation, and then they become what we call what ifs. If you watch the Avengers movie, it's kind of like the snap. Even though this was a thing that was created back in the late 80s and published in the 1990s, way before the Marvel Cinematic Universe. That's kind of similar type effect, you could say. So, Mark, your thoughts on an Ord going into a different reality and being able to reconnect with their original reality?
Well, so I look at Ords from the idea that non-reality rated entities, ordinary people, we shorthand that down to Ords. Essentially, their life force, their life energy is a possibility, and so the ordinary people that are not reality rated, who haven't had their moment of crisis and transcended, depend on that one possibility to stay alive, to remain anchored in their reality. When you cross a boundary, number one, you gotta survive crossing the boundary, because if there's a storm there, that's a problem in and of itself. And that storm could be, the classic clouds with red and blue lightning and all this swirling around, and you got to actually, weather the storm and get through it. Or it could be just crossing the boundary, and that's still the punching through that barrier still requires a check. And the Ord is not capable of making that. And so they have a problem right then and there. But it's not always a problem. And if you find a spot where you can just cross, you've gone from one reality to the other. So it's absolutely a risk, because eventually you're going to do something that is contradictory to that cosm. And it could be just as simple as a thought, as you alluded to. It could be simply a thought, oh man, I really miss insert some contradictory concept, whatever that is, higher than the social axiom. Maybe you're from Isle and magic is a big thing, and you've just crossed into a reality that has a very low magic axiom.
Or you want some burger and fries.
Or you want a burger and fries, and that doesn't really exist there. And that contradictory thought is, in game mechanical terms, there's no die roll for a contradictory thought. But when we step into the esoteric lore of the game, the Ord just doing that creates that contradiction. And every time that Ord creates that contradiction, there's a chance that they disconnect. And the moment that they disconnect, now they've got a problem, because they don't that possibility energy is searching for something to anchor to. If they're fortunate at that point, it anchors, and one of two things happens. It either anchors to the reality that they're in, and they transform to that reality, which they still exist. They still have that possibility, that life force, if you will. Or they turn around disoriented and go back into their cosm and reestablish their connection to their cosm, because they feel disoriented, like, oh, what's going on? And they turn around, and they walk back, cross the barrier for whatever reason. Um, what's far more likely is that they continue doing what they intended to do in this foreign cosm, and eventually they create another contradiction which they can't survive, because they don't have the way to do it. In game mechanical terms, when you disconnect, you start rolling reality, and if you roll a one, you can lose an ad in reality, or you transform if you don't have an ad to lose. Or you could choose to transform, which, sorry, Jim, we did our best. Um, Jim knows. But for the Ord who's wandering through this new reality, you know, it's a giant risk. And so they generally, the High Lords of, Jean Malraux doesn't send his Ords into another, as missionaries into another cosm. He's got, for example, hospitalers typically would do that. So you have to have reality rated agents that do it. Now, the way you can do it without that is you hand your Ord a talisman,
Mm-hmm.
which is a small possibility charged, temporarily charged. It's not an eternity shard, but it's an item that anchors whoever carries it to their whatever cosm it was created out of. And there's not a lot of lore for how those get made. So from a game master standpoint, when you need one, just create it. It's short term. So if your Storm Knights happen to capture it and keep it, you can have it fade out and discharge its energy as quickly or as long as short amount of time or as long amount of time as you need it to be around. But it's a great plot device to say, why are these group of Ords here and not worried about disconnecting, or they've been here for a while? Well, they got talisman. So I mean, it's to me, it really boils down to that idea that the Ord's energy, life energy, is a possibility, and if you spend that possibility, you can only spend it once, and then if you have to spend it again, you're gone, and that's when you what if, and it's like you were never there.
Jay, your thoughts, or you have anything to add?
That mostly covers it, I believe. But I guess the big thing is, as Mark mentioned, traveling into another cosm itself is pretty dangerous because there are reality storms surrounding everything. Like in Pan Pacifica and Cyber Papacy, they're kind of tamped down a bit. But in Tharkle, they're super powerful. So it kind of depends where you are. But a lot of adventurers, for some reason, seem to be under the assumption that Ords are just going back and forth all the time. So there might be some ways to get through, to navigate through without suffering the full extent of it, perhaps, because as Mark said, it does require a reality roll at some point that an Ord cannot make. So otherwise, going through a reality storm would almost just be a death sentence constantly,
Mm-hmm.
and no one would ever do it. Um, that said, once you do go into another realm, if it's a mixed or dominant zone for your reality, you could still function fine, except there's always the chance that you might disconnect. Now, for core Earth characters, there's at least the possibility, especially in the early months of the war, that you don't necessarily have to brave the reality storms to go back out to core Earth. There might be hard points still, or soft points in wherever you are. So if you can actually go back to a hard point of your reality, you can also reconnect there.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, for Ords in a pure zone or somewhere like that, they don't really transform in the same way as Storm Knights, like player characters do. All the talk about having too high of an axiom thoughts is kind of replicated in game with the surge
Mm-hmm.
result on the drama deck, because otherwise, because in classic Torg you did have to do a check. Like if you started to come up with a plan that was too much for the living land, you'd have to do a check, and that was just a real pain, right? So the surge kind of just covers all of those kind of things plus armor, things that don't
Mm-hmm.
really require rolls. So if you think to yourself, if I'm your average Ord going through my day-to-day life, I'm probably not flipping many drama cards. But if they're involved in any kind of action something that might make the Everlaws take notice of them, they are likely to get a surge. And once there's a surge, they're disconnected and they have no chance of reconnection. They don't have a reality skill, so they can't roll to reconnect. The only way they can reconnect is by getting back to their home reality. And it just happens after a while. It's a little bit vague if memory serves, but it just sort of happens.
Mm-hmm.
Likewise, even if they're just chilling in a pure zone, eventually they will transform. There is a chart in the back of the Torg core which says how, like, what percent of the population has transformed after a certain amount of months go by. So
Page
for
215.
there we go. So for most ords, that is at the speed of plot. It's, you're not going to be checking individually for each character, but even like just being there, they will eventually transform. So it gets harder the later in the war this goes. There's less hard points. And as Mark mentioned, there are ways to get through like talismans, but talismans are created by darkness devices. So there might be Eternity Shard versions, who knows, right? But currently they're made by darkness devices, so they are tools of the High Lords. There are a few other things like the Cyber Papacy has the Cyber Eucharists where they can connect to the Godnet still, even in other realities. And then there's some really jammy bottle related stuff for Zarkold, but there are ways. But also, if you do need to get an Ord strike team into another reality and you want to avoid any of the reality storms, the Underground is always a good option. It connects all of the realms, and as far as I know, you don't actually have to go through a reality storm when you use it. So, but you have other chances of disconnecting because you're going to be technically in Isle of the Living Land, I think, at certain points, regardless. But yeah, Ords can function in other realities. It's very dangerous, and I think the longer the war goes, the less and less of it you'll see. But in the early months or the first year, maybe first 2 years, it's probably still going to be fairly prevalent.
Most people have learned their lesson by
Yeah.
by this point, and if we're envisioning being around day 300, 360, something like that in the invasion, most ordinary people have learned their lesson or have heard about what happens if you do these things, and they don't do that anymore. So any organization in the game in the game that's actively sending their ords across a boundary, that should look, in my opinion, that should look like an act of desperation.
The desperate situation, yes, that's what I was like, yay, and then okay,
and then I kept going.
Continue.
Well, but that's it.
And don't forget, the Cyber Papacy does have a expensive, transcontinental ship as well.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
So
yeah.
you can get from Europe to South America,
We just
all
used
while
that.
still being in the Cyber Papacy. So that's another option.
Yeah, and I would also say that I believe the first act of the God Box has a situation similar to that, where the Storm Knights are sent from a hard point, sent in to get. And since it's the very first thing, I don't think it's that big of a spoiler because that's like your first job in the God Box. Go find some humans that are trapped in the Living Land before they transform, bring them back to the hard point so that they don't transform or get messed up. So that also, if you're looking for a source to help you with. But again, thank you very much, Daniel. Hopefully we gave you a lot to think about. Moving on to Sitting Duck, who has written us multiple times. It just says, I'm curious to know if you intend to feature any more episodes where you analyze perks. Looking through the archives, so far the only categories covered are Abomination, Leadership, Outsider, Social, Vitality, and Pan-Pacifica Backer. After episode 40, they sort of fell off the radar. Was this through disinterest, or were they just forgotten about once you started on the Cosm Card episodes? If the latter, are there any plans for future perk episodes? So Sitting Duck, I'll just flat out say it, that when we were going through those various perk categories, things were just going through those. At some point with the new rule set, I realized that some of these perks are going to be altered, and then that information would no longer be pertinent. So I decided to hold off until we're able to go through perks with the new rules update. If that means that I'm going to have to go back and change the title to be, like Torg Eternity, and call the new one or like older or obsolete or whatever.
Can't use classic.
Or classic. Yeah, can't use classic. Or start a new playlist or something like that to differentiate what are now the current rules with the future rules. But basically, it's that's the reasoning. So no, it was not through disinterest. It was just through me thinking about lore and stuff would be evergreen material where specific rules and stuff that may or may not change would cause problems and confusing for future people. So.
And it would take 3 hours to do prowess.
Right. You're being optimistic too. So that is the answer. But thank you for writing, Sitting Duck. And then we will move to the last one from Craig. And this one apparently is a resend. I don't know if this had got the original email from April 26th got thrown in my spam. I usually check the spam, and it's mostly just very obvious spam of people trying to make my organization better. And this is not an organization. This is just the Delphi Council debriefing. So I just know that those are fake. So I did not see your email, sorry, but you sent it again, and this time it came, and it was general Torg Eternity questions, and it was labeled not junk. So let's get into your not junk email. So it says, hello all, despite being a long-term role player, 35 plus years in the UK, and owning the original Torg, it never quite found its way to my table. I have now finally managed to start Torg Eternity for my weekly group and have a blast completing all 7 day one adventures. The game feels fresh and has renewed my love for role-playing and Game Master. So very glad that Torg was able to get you renewed and refreshed into RPGs. Coming so late to Torg Eternity, I've loved the amount of material available, and am loving to catch up with the podcast up to episode 32, which are all amazing, by the way. Well, thank you for that. I have a couple of questions. Number one, the basic system for making test rolls is roll a d20, look up the result on the table, then add the applicable attribute and skill add, plus and minus any modifiers. We have found it simpler to do this in reverse, taking the attribute plus the skill, then roll the d20 and add the bonus. Why is the rule book method seen as preferable? So on this one, I am going to say, was it Jay or Mark? I know one of you looked it up right before we started to actually look down. It was Mark. Mark is the one who...
No, Jay did it. Jay did it.
Oh, you're pointing down, which
you're
is
under
actually...
me,
which is...
Oh, well, I don't know where it is. It's Jay. It's not me.
Jay
found it.
Jay found it, and we were all like, oh, that's how it's actually written. Because, as we discussed, math, when you're dealing with addition and subtraction, it really doesn't matter the order of things. We all three do it the way that you suggested, is we have on our character sheet character attributes, character adds, and then the place where the skill value is. And from that, Torg Eternity is transparent, so you know the difficulty number that you're going against, and being able to see your skill value compared to the difficulty number, you know what type of bonus you need, whether that's positive, or I could get up to X negative modifier and still succeed or get a good. We all look at that, kind of keep it in our mind, roll the d20, look at the chart, add that bonus to the skill attribute or skill value, and then tack on any modifiers, whether they're from perks or spells, miracles, psionic powers, other powers, or cards. but it's all just addition and subtracting until you get your final skill total compared to the difficulty number. So I would not say the rulebook method is seen as preferable. I would just say that's how the rule describes it, and all three of us, and apparently you, have just intuitively did it in a different way that makes more sense and works easier for us, and including you. And that's not bad. I don't think that there's any difference in the math. There's no difference in the math. It's just what you put first. So
Math is math.
Yeah.
So Mark or Jay, did you have anything to add to that? Nope.
Not really.
Okay, so yeah, it was just like
No.
It works.
I mean,
it works.
add and subtract until you get to the number. I mean, I use it as a calculus. Do I have a shot at making the number because I know what the difficulty number is? Yes. Okay, let's go. No. Okay, I'm just gonna sit here.
I guess I would say you do not have to be 100% beholden to the exact order
No.
that they say to do things in the rules. As long as it still works out the same mathematically, it's fine.
Yeah, and I was trying to remember, and I was talking with Mark and Jay beforehand. Not this specific instant, but there was another. I guess what it is all the difficulty numbers. That sometimes it's like challenging, -2 or a 12. Do you want to make it a -2 to your skill test, or do you want to bump up the difficulty number to 12 from the standard of 10? Mathematically, it doesn't matter. And both of those are listed in the current rule set to give you the option of what feels better for you, what works better for you. So I would just go with that. If that feels better with you, go for it. Don't worry about the specific way of doing things if the end result is the same. So the second one, my group is about to create their first characters and have questions about origin. Where in the rules does it mention race can be kept when transforming, such as Adinos, Nile Empire Storm Knight? Wouldn't this be contradictory? And what is the roleplay difference between a non-transformed Orosh Storm Knight and a transformed Orosh Storm Knight? So it's kind of two questions, but we'll go with Mark on this. I will say, where in the rules does it mention that they are kept? I'm not sure if I can point to a specific page. That might also be in the FAQ. But it is a thing that you would normally, or officially, you don't change character races when you transform. It's not contradictory because, for the most part, it's just a living organism. And a Dinos might have not be on Earth, but it doesn't mean that they are contradictory to Earth. Just
Life is not contradictory.
So
Just because a dwarf doesn't exist in core Earth today doesn't mean that a dwarf can't live. I mean, he draws breath, he breathes, she breathes. The Dinos breathe, elves breathe. You know that a demon breathes. Right? They're not contradictory as a life form, which is. And I don't know where it is in the book. I'm hoping Jay is furiously looking through PDFs at the moment and trying to. Oh, you found it? Where is it?
Page 181.
Okay, so 181 is a page that you want to look at. The only slight tweaks are the aspirant and the elf. If they they get the fatigue thing, but that's in any magic deficient reality. But that's just a thing that then their home reality is going to be magically deficient to them if, say, they go to Tharkold or not Tharkold, but Pan Pacifica, or possibly even Core Earth at a 9.
I guess this becomes jarring a little bit to keep it in the Eilish, because we're going to talk about Island a little bit, and we may get deeper into this. I don't know in a minute, but in high fantasy. In other games, elves and dwarves are more of a fey creature and have more of a connection to the magical and the mystical, which in Torg Eternity terms, now you're tying the life of the creature to an axiom in the cosm versus just existing. And so I think part of the disconnect where why don't they transform? Why don't humans transform into elves or elves transform into Dinos and that kind of thing is that it's not life's not contradictory. And that's I think on page 180 it says the one constant is that non-living things don't transform into living things and vice versa. And I think that you take that into the living things, just that life isn't contradictory. Existence, you exist, and you existed before and you will exist again because you're crossing into a cosm. The dwarf is not a contradiction just because it's a dwarf. The thing that makes the dwarf a contradiction is that the dwarf can cast miracles, and Core Earth doesn't have them at that level of miracles. So that's the contradiction. It's not the dwarf that's the contradiction. So I think you get to the point where that one thing is a game mechanic that creates. If you just gloss over it and say, okay, the race of the character is not contradictory, moving on, done. That's a much shorter conversation than my elf is transforming in a Rorsch. What do I turn into? Mm-hmm. Or I'm transforming into, I'm a human in Isle. Do I transform into an elf? Do I transform into a dwarf?
Centaur.
Centaur, Fae. What do I transform into? Why doesn't it make? And then you've got a much longer conversation. And from a organized play standpoint, you also have a much deeper rules conversation to limit the way that you could break the rules and destroy the concept of the game by having people who take this starting thing and see an advantage, a mechanical or mathematical advantage to going here and transforming, because we have that a lot of times where you're playing an elf from a Rorsch. Why are you playing an elf from a Rorsch? Well, because the elf went to a Rorsch and transformed, and now I want them to be I want an elven whatever that does these other things. And you can do that within the rules, but it's an elf. Your home cosm now is a Rorsch because you transformed. Well, that in and of itself presents enough problems that you're like, I don't really want to have to worry about transforming my elf into a human that then transforms into a dwarf over here. And now we got to figure out all this other BS about why did I want to do that or whatever. So it's just simpler to say life is not contradictory. Don't change the race. Done.
Even beyond that, aspirants are contradictory, not because of themselves, but because they come with occultech.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's part of their racial package. They have occultech, so even still, they don't transfer. Like, they would still keep that, right? Or wouldn't they? Because it's part of their.
Because it's part of their thing.
Yeah.
So Torg Eternity Torganized play. In order to be an aspirant, you have to earn a cert. And in order to earn that cert, you have to run on Blood on the Blasted Lands as a book. And when you finish running the book,
Torg,
so we solved that problem by saying nope, can't do it.
In regular Torg, you could be an aspirant, and then you could go to Orosh,
yes.
and then you could transform, and then you could die and become a ghost. Right? So
with an occult tech arm.
Yeah.
You're not wrong. But see, yes, but so GMs, be prepared to do this. However, the table variation.
Right. What I would do at my own table with that aspirant is if they transformed into, say, cyber papacy, then they're just the Tech 25 makes it, and they're still an aspirant techno demon. If I had them, say, transform into Isle or into Core Earth, then I would say that they are not a techno-demon aspirant, they are a demon aspirant. And I would remove that package because that's what the Tharkoldu are in Torg Eternity. In classic Torg, they were their own species. they weren't, they were called demons because, or techno demons, because they looked like demons, but they were not actually physical manifestations of evil, which is how they are in Torg Eternity. So I would still allow that they can be that aspirant of, oh, let me try to do good, or I've been thinking about all my bad stuff and I kind of feel a little bummed about it, you know, not a whole lot, but a little bit, enough for me not to really consider myself a full-fledged demon. I'm going to call myself an aspirant. Whether I would tell the player to replace that or not, probably not. That would just be one of those things that you're no longer a techno demon, so you don't have the techno part of it, but you're a demon part of it. Or on that one, I might just have you don't transform, you just into nothing because you are a contradiction, and then that's really really harsh. So
again, table variation.
Yes.
Killer Gene.
Because I would take it. I would your let's say you had the cyber armor, the occult tech arm, right? Your arm magically is back, and that piece is gone because that's not what Aurora supports. And transformation, you're supposed, in my opinion, you're supposed to take the character. It's not a rebuild of your character. You're not refund all of your experience and go, let's build it back to that experience level in any way you want. I've always looked at it as what's the closest analog of what you were in the environment that you're now in and call home. And you try to for example, a Pan-Pacifica character that can psionically manifest pyrokinesis that transforms into a Rorsch needs to come up with a way to manifest that pyrotechnic fire somehow, and that could be done with alchemy or occult rituals, or maybe Slayer's gun with the what's the round that they with shells, but that you have to carry that analog through. So what do I look like? What did I do before? What's the closest analog in the new world? Because I kind of transformed into that closest thing. And a lot of times there are things that don't go one to one because you're not supposed to refund ability. You're not supposed to change your abilities. But if it were, I'm going to go from this thing into, I do psionics over here, but I can do faith-based miracles over here, but I don't have the skill for it. Well, what if you took and you flip your skills, the one that was your dump stat before and the one that was high, and then you flip it. Now your spirit's really high, so that you can do the faith-based stuff. Okay, well that makes sense. I would do that. I would allow that, so that, because that's what makes sense in a transformation. Your mileage may vary.
Any additional thoughts, Jay?
Well, as far as the difference between being a native from the invading cosm and being a transformed character, I think that really depends on each realm specifically. Like, it seems to be that in the Living Land and in Isle, a lot of the people that transform are actually, like, assuming they don't get murdered or whatever, they're actually having a better time, than they were before. Whereas a lot of people who transform in Tharkold and Ororsh, not so much. And so, especially something like in Ororsh, you have the Victorians, and then you've got all of like the Indians and Pakistanis and all of them, like, that have transformed into like what looks like a Victorian society. And then the Victorians, like, well, you're not really real Victorians, but then there's not that many Victorians really, so they're kind of also the refugees here now. And so there's who's really, like, you get into this weird power dynamic now, because the Victorians allege that they know how to deal with the Gaunt Man and all of his minions. So at first, all of these core earthers are thankful for what's happening, but the longer it goes on, it's like, okay, who's really in charge here? Then you have like the Army of the Light up in Isle. You've got all of the people that came to Core Earth with during the invasion. They came from Isle with Ardenay, versus people who have just transformed and barely have any idea what the hell is going on. So I think especially like at the very beginning of the invasion, you get a lot of the core Earthers who've transformed have no clue, and it's very confusing. But probably like after the 3 to 8 month period, it starts to even out. Like I know I've had a fair amount of elven cyber papacy characters in my game, so it happens. Like the whole transforming, and you got kind of that's also something you got to think about as a GM because like, is it theoretically possible that this could have happened to a character first? Yes, but I would not let a character start like that personally. I know one of them is a game I started in beta, so it was like, okay, you can do it. But I wouldn't let anyone start like a brand new alpha character as something like that. I would want it to happen in game. There's a lot of things to look forward to. You don't have to waste everything on your backstory. Look ahead, not back. Is the way I like to look at these things.
Transformation is cool as a character. Everybody's like, oh, I don't want to do it. I don't want to. I embrace it. I absolutely, if it happens, I've done it with a number of characters, and it is a unique role playing experience that is unique to Torg Eternity. Don't miss out on that opportunity to have that at the table because it's a lot of fun. It's different, and but it's like it's so much fun.
I'll say, players, as a player, we don't like railroads. So why railroad yourself into this is the path I'm going? If you have a chance to transform, hey, your path could change. It could be interesting. I'll add to Jay getting into the second part of the question is what is the roleplay difference between a non-transformed Aurora Storm Knight and a transformed Aurora Storm Knight? That would work in any of the realities would be the non-transformed Storm Knight. So one that they came from their original cosm, the source of the reality, and would understand what's happening back there, or what did. A transformed Storm Knight who transforms into a new reality are still going to have memories and thoughts, or identifications, I'll say that, not thoughts, identifications of what they knew. As an example, a Aurora Storm Knight that was transformed, who originally was Core Earth, they're going to know what a telephone is. They're going to know, or a cell phone. They're going to know what a car is. They're going to know what modern computer are. They will have very little understanding of how they work. As Storm Knights, they can cause contradictions, and that's how you will get your a Dinos character driving a car. But they have the chance of disconnecting, so they're not going to forget their moms and their dads, and that they come from Jefferson City. They might pronounce it differently, depending in Living Land. They might kind of make it a little more primitive or more gruntal or something. But it's basically that those ideas, I guess, those naming conventions are not going to go away. And as Jay said, they're going to be confused too. Like, it really sounds bad, but almost kind of a Alzheimer's or dementia type thing when you can identify something, but it hurts or you can't remember how to operate it. So you can really think about how annoying and how upset a character could get, and you can add that part to the role playing and show how they're adapting to the new reality, or maybe they get lucky and transform into something else. I've had multiple characters in multiple games who have transformed multiple times. To go with Jay's ghost thing, I had a Nile Empire gadget person transformed into a Rorsch, became a monster hunter, and then died and became a ghost. So, certain things like that can happen. Starting off on one, I had a player be the dreaded Stallinger from the Living Land, but was then became an electric samurai. He thought it would be funny and name himself Shuriken, so this is a throwing star. And then later, since in my personal game, I still keep the land below separate, and the land below, land above from Classic Torg. I don't have it as part of the living land. I call it the lost land. And then he went there and transformed into that and got some savage stuff and a couple of pulp powers. So it's a kind of a traditionally in Classic Torg, it was a combination of Nile Empire and living land, very pulpy living land.
And it worked out.
And that's, kind of his progression. So but he always knew who he was, where he was from. He just gained and lost how the workings of stuff were. So
that's actually one of the other interesting ones is the Nile Empire, because I don't think they haven't really addressed it directly, but I know in Classic Tour, Terra is not the Nile Empire.
Right.
Right.
It was even different.
So Mobius has conquered 9 other cosms, but the core Earth is his 10th great empire. But you do have all of these mystery men and everyone coming over to the Nile Empire from Terra, but the Nile Empire is not what they're used to.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they're used to just what we would consider normal at that time period, right? It's not all ancient Egyptian themed necessarily.
Right.
So you get into this other level of disconnect where now the transformed Nile Empire characters think this is totally normal because it's actually, it's Egyptian gods that we've all known. They may be in different areas, as we discussed, but the Terran characters that come over are like, what is all this? We just knew Mobius as a criminal. He was a villain. Why is he a pharaoh now?
Yeah, Dr. Mobius.
So that's another thing to be
Who's
aware
this pharaoh guy you keep talking about?
Yeah.
So
if I could jump back real quick to the Ords and the confusion and whatnot, your parallel to their confusion when they transform is apt. But keep in mind that people are like, why would these people allow this invasion? Why would we just go along with it? They're confused and they're reaching for something that feels familiar, and the people that are here, the invaders, present to them something that makes sense to the recently transformed. They for example, in Isle, they present to them a feudal structure. They're looking, they had a job in an office building where they went in and they did project management or criminal investigation or whatever they did, and now they've transformed and they feel this need to be doing something. They had an occupation. I was good at this thing and I did this thing and I went to this place and I took instruction from somebody, but I don't remember a whole lot about that. And it doesn't seem, the building now is a spire and a castle of some kind, right? And they're like, I don't really understand. And then here comes this knight who says, I am your lord and I instruct you to go into that field and harvest for my crops. And they go, oh yeah, that makes sense. He's my lord. He's telling me what to do. That's what I was looking for. And then they turn and they go do and that becomes their life. And they just drop into it because to them, that makes sense now. And that anchors them in their new reality. And so they're doing what it's like that nagging thing. And if I don't think about it, I don't look at it, it doesn't bother me. And so I feel comfortable. I go over here. And they go do what they've been told because that feels right. But in the back of their mind, every now and then, if you come and go, well, weren't you working over in this other? Yeah, I was. And then if you tell them about it, it comes back to their mind and they remember it. But the minute that you go away and stop talking to them, somebody says, hey, weren't we supposed to harvest this grain? Like, oh, yeah. And they drop back into the old practice. So that's how the transformed Ords allow this whole thing to happen, because it's a comfortable blanket to them that makes the nagging, annoying thing that doesn't fit right to them go away.
Okay, so the last 3 questions you have, Craig, I will be able to somewhat answer. So the first one is, any news on Torg 1.5 Kickstarter? Apologies if this has already been mentioned in more recent podcasts. I haven't really mentioned things. We will have a Kickstarter this year. I personally don't like giving dates, because as soon as I give a date and a delay happens, then I've lied. Or that can be brought up of, oh, you said it was day such and such and now things have changed. We are on a schedule. We are pretty sure like very sure that we will be able to make said schedule. You might have heard things from people who watch some of the German Ulysses Spiele things that it might be more concrete. That is by Marcus. He is above me on the ranking of people in Torg. So you can listen to anything he says. I just prefer not to say it until I know it's happening, and we will as soon as I feel absolutely confident, 100%, not 99.9%, 100%. When I see it like scheduled in that, then I will say something. So then the next question, will Torg 1.5 include an update to the Cosm sourcebooks, or will it supersede them in making the old obsolete? Do you plan version 1.5 card decks? So first off, clarification, we have been for the last 2 or so years talking about a Torg 1.5 that is now being wrapped up into the year 2. Everything going forward we're just calling Year Torg Eternity Year 2. That includes rule updates, rule revisions, etc., as well as the ongoing meta plot. So the next Kickstarter will be Torg Year 2. It will have all of that stuff. When you say, is it will include updates to Cosm source books or supersede anything, just like other things that have been printed in one book and then in the later book get reprinted, like a Whirlwind used to only, I believe, be for melee, but so many people used it for unarmed and melee, it later became melee, or sometimes things got updated in later books. So whatever the current book is the new rule. If you're talking about lore, we're keeping the same. Year 2 is just building off of year 1, so the Cosm source books and adventures, etc., will be perfectly the plots and stories will all be relevant to year 2 and going forward. Do you plan version 1.5 card decks? So year 2 card decks, we will be having new card decks for people, etc. will be part of that. And then number 5, any insider information, ideas where to purchase hard copy Torg Eternity in the UK or where they can ship overseas. I'm having real difficulty locating Pan Pacifica items in particular. Drive-through RPG electronic has been the only option. I would look for the Ulysses Spiele F shop. I know on the American version, that's where we can order the physical versions of stuff, and I believe the German Ulysses Spiele website has a shop, and they have the English editions as well as the other language editions there. So that's where I would suggest going to. I personally don't have any control or any knowledge about where books are stored or kept, etc., other than that. Thanks again for all your hard work. It is much appreciated, Craig. So thank you for writing us. And again, anybody can write us at torgdcd@gmail.com, and we will read and answer and talk about your stuff as well. So we do thank you for writing in, and please do email us at torgdcd@gmail.com. Next episode, we hope to get into Isle, talking about the dwarves and elves specifically. But until then, we hope you have fun in your own Cosmverse. Bye.